Now a study, this was done recently by a guy at Harvard named Josh Green. What he does is he puts people in brain scanners, functional MRIs, and he gives them one of the great horrifying moral decisions that ever sort of actually occurred in history, which was the old scenario that you and a bunch of people are hiding from the Nazis who were nearby, and there's a baby with you, and the baby who keeps crying, and it is clear if the baby keeps crying, you are all going to be caught and killed. Is it okay to smother the child? And this wonderfully hypothetical, let's write a doctoral thesis dissertation on this problem here, was one which was a human sort of decision that had to be made endless number of times. What would you do in that circumstance? And what he shows in these studies are that people who activate the anterior cingulate less when they are contemplating this decision are more likely to reach the decision that it is okay to smother the child. You see that in these studies. Something about the feeling the pain element, the empathizing, something about that, when it is not as extreme, that is a predictor in these studies of individuals who will vote for the smothering. All of this has given rise to this view that a lot of what's happening between the cortex and the limbic system is a whole lot more complicated than this old dichotomy between thought and emotion, and the cortex is about thought and the limbic system is about emotion. What is clear is instead they are inseparable. This whole notion brought up already, that guy Damasio, major figure in the field, this book of his called Descartes' Error, where he goes over Descartes' notion of the separability of thought and emotion, and how in terms of brain function that is not remotely the case. In some realms, you can partially separate cortical function, frontal cortical function, from limbic function. One example of this, and this was a classic study done by that same guy, Josh Green, and this was when he was still a graduate student, involved making use of people in a brain scanner with what's apparently like a classic test in, or a classic puzzle in philosophy, the runaway trolley problem. Here's the scenario. There is a trolley which is somehow broken loose from its brake. It is rolling down the tracks where it is going to roll over there and kill 5 people. First scenario, you have a choice. You can pull a lever which will cause the trolley to be diverted onto a different track where it will kill 1 person. Is it okay to pull the lever, saving these 5 people and 1 person getting killed? Second scenario, you have the option, you're standing behind this big beefy person and you can push them onto the track where the trolley will hit them and kill them, but it will stop it from hitting the 5 people. Are you willing to kill 1 person in order to save 5? And something that is shown in these studies over and over is like 75% of people are willing to pull the lever, 25% of people or so are willing with their own hands to push somebody onto the track. The math, the logic is absolutely equal, but this is always interpreted as how we make different sorts of decisions when it is a much more visceral in your face. You are going to have to push this person to his death with your own hands versus something as impersonal as pulling a lever, sitting in a cockpit in a military base in Las Vegas and killing people on the other side of the globe. How salient in your face is it? You get very different responses. And what Green showed in his study was, have people contemplating whether or not to pull the lever, it's the cortex that's activating, predominantly frontal cortex. Have people decide whether or not to push with their hands, it's predominantly limbic activation. Another version of this has been researched by a guy at Dartmouth named Oliver Goodenough, again brain imaging, and he is both a neurobiologist and also on the law school faculty there. And here's the sort of study he does. You will see the equivalency of it. Put people in a scanner, and they've been going through a mock jury trial, and what they now receive on the scanner are the judge's orders to the jury before they go and deliberate. First version, the judge says, remember what you were here for. You may have your feelings. You may have your feelings about the person and what they did or what they didn't do. But at the end of the day, your job as a juror now deliberating is simply to decide, was this law violated or not? This is not for you to decide if it's a good law or not. This is simply, was this law broken? Second scenario, the judge stands there and says, okay, as you go and deliberate, remember, of course, what the law is, but remember, at the end of the day, what is this system about? It is about protecting the weak from the powerful, and you are a decision maker at this point. Two totally different. One is rule-bound, one is empathy-bound. People get the first sets of rules, cortex is activating, second set of rules, limbic system is activating. So those are some domains where, in fact, they are quite separable. What you see, though, is that there are all sorts of domains in which it is a completely ridiculous dichotomy to make between, pure abstract cognitive decisions and these messy, yucky, emotive, limbic sorts of ones. Instead, tremendous amounts of interactions between the two. One domain where you see this, which is what happens when you begin to damage some of these structures, you change the flavor of the decisions that are made. Get people with frontal damage and give them the runaway trolley problem, and they are far more likely to say, yes, it is okay to push somebody onto the tracks. They get a far more utilitarian decision. Equally interesting, and the same sort of punchline, studies where a technique that's now just being worked out called transmagnetic stimulation, where you can decrease the activity of certain cortical regions for a couple minutes at a time, turn off one subregion of the frontal cortex in people, in volunteers, and in various game theory games that they're doing, they become a lot more utilitarian, they become a lot more selfish.